Welcome to an unforgettable journey that will take you to the edge of human survival, courage, and resilience. In a world where the odds are stacked against humanity, we will witness the incredible fight for survival, determination, and hope. This is the story of how humanity, facing extinction, fought back against overwhelming forces to carve out a new dawn. If you're ready to experience a saga of bravery, sacrifice, and unyielding will, then you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you don't miss any of this epic journey. In this story, we'll see how ordinary people, driven by the sheer will to survive, rise to the occasion and defy the impossible. They will face challenges no one could ever predict, but their strength will define the fate of humanity. Will they succeed or fall under the weight of the apocalypse? Stay tuned, and let's dive into the first part of our story. The world as it once was had fallen into chaos. Cities that once bustled with life now lay in ruins, their shattered buildings standing like silent tombstones. The world's infrastructure had crumbled, communication had ceased, and survival had become the only priority. It had all begun so suddenly, no warnings, no signs. An unknown enemy had come from the stars, and with their arrival, humanity was plunged into an irreversible spiral. The invaders had arrived with an overwhelming force, advanced beyond human comprehension, wiping out whole cities in days. At first, people didn't believe it. Denial, as it often does in the face of overwhelming disaster, had spread like wildfire. Governments were paralyzed, unable to act as the disaster unfolded. They had never prepared for something so catastrophic. But soon, the realization set in: humanity was facing an extinction-level event, and no one knew how to stop it. The invaders, creatures from beyond Earth, known only as the Xey'ran, had powers that humanity could barely comprehend. Their weapons seemed to tear through entire battalions with ease, and their technology was far beyond anything the world had ever seen. The Xey'ran had come for one purpose: to wipe out humanity and claim the planet for their own. Survival became a constant struggle. Governments tried to mobilize forces, but it was clear that the enemy had already won. The cities fell one by one, and millions of lives were lost in mere hours. No army, no weapons, no defense could stop the onslaught. People ran, hid, and tried to survive the best way they could, but the devastation was overwhelming. In the midst of the destruction, a small group of survivors emerged. They were not soldiers, scientists, or politicians. They were just ordinary people who had managed to survive the initial wave. Among them were men and women from all walks of life: a mechanic who had once worked in a small garage, a teacher who had loved educating children, a farmer who knew how to grow crops, and a former soldier who had seen his comrades fall in the first days of the invasion. They were all that was left of humanity's spirit, but in their hearts burned a fire of determination. They weren't willing to give up without a fight. Among the group was Sarah, a young woman who had watched her entire family perish in the first wave. She had been a teacher before the invasion, but now she found herself leading a ragtag group of survivors. Her eyes burned with the desire to avenge her family and protect the last of humanity. Sarah's leadership would become vital to the group's survival as they navigated the apocalyptic wasteland, but even she didn't fully realize the immense responsibility that would rest on her shoulders. At first, their plan was simple: survive. They scrounged for food, water, and weapons, using whatever they could find to fend off the occasional attacks from the Xey'ran scouting parties. The world around them had become unrecognizable. Cities were abandoned, turned into nothing more than tombs filled with remnants of humanity's former glory. What had once been a thriving planet was now an empty shell, waiting for the final blow. But in the midst of the destruction, something incredible began to happen. The survivors, against all odds, started to organize. They found each other, joined forces, and began to fight back in whatever small ways they could. They had no weapons, no supplies, but they had something more powerful: human ingenuity. The world may have been falling apart, but the spirit of humanity remained. Sarah and her group began to explore the remnants of the world's major cities, finding what they could: old weapons, abandoned vehicles, and, most importantly, knowledge. It was a desperate search for anything that could help them fight back. And as they ventured deeper into the wreckage, they made a startling discovery: the Xey'ran were not invincible. the survivors found a hidden bunker, buried deep beneath the ruins of an old military complex. Inside, they discovered a cache of advanced human technology that had been kept secret from the public. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to give them a fighting chance. And that was all they needed. The spark of hope began to grow, and with it, their resolve. They knew the battle ahead would be long, and they knew the cost would be high. But Sarah and her group were not ready to give up. The world had fallen, but humanity was far from defeated. They would rise again. Against all odds, humanity's fight for a new dawn had begun. As Sarah stood on the edge of the destroyed city, looking out at the horizon, she knew that the road ahead would be filled with danger, heartache, and loss. But she also knew one thing for certain: humanity was not done yet. The story of their survival had only just begun. In the days following their discovery, Sarah and her group began to gather what little resources they could find. The hidden military bunker provided them with more than just technology; it offered them something even more valuable: hope. But hope was fragile, especially in a world that had already been ravaged by the Xey'ran. The group knew that they were only a small, scattered band of survivors, and the enemy was still out there, relentless in their pursuit of total domination. The survivors, however, were not willing to back down. Sarah, once a teacher, had now become a leader in the truest sense. She took charge of organizing the group, and as their leader, she instilled in them a sense of purpose and unity. Her strength and unwavering determination became the glue that held them together. She understood that it wasn't just about surviving, it was about reclaiming their planet and proving to the Xey'ran that humanity wasn't so easily broken. Over the course of several weeks, the group started to expand their ranks. As they traveled from one ruined city to another, they encountered other survivors, some in hiding, some willing to fight, and some just trying to find safety. It was an incredibly dangerous process. The Xey'ran had become more organized, their patrols sweeping through the wasteland with brutal efficiency. They had already wiped out most of the human population, and now their focus was on eradicating the remnants of humanity completely. Yet, the survivors were undeterred. In the heart of a destroyed metropolitan area, they came across a former military officer named Captain Daniels, who had been leading a small group of guerrilla fighters. The captain had spent months evading the Xey'ran forces, surviving through sheer tenacity and wit. His group had fought back in small, tactical skirmishes, but their supplies were running low, and their numbers were dwindling. When Daniels met Sarah and her group, he saw something in them that he hadn't seen in a long time: hope. He joined their cause, bringing his experience and combat knowledge to their fledgling resistance. Under Daniel's guidance, Sarah's group started to become more organized in their efforts to fight back. They started small, launching guerrilla-style raids against Xey'ran supply lines and communications outposts. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Each successful mission gave them more confidence, more weapons, and more recruits. As their numbers grew, so did their determination. They knew that the Xey'ran were far from defeated, but every victory, no matter how small, sent a message to the invaders: humanity was not ready to die. Sarah's role as a leader began to evolve as well. She wasn't just a survivor anymore, she had become the face of the resistance. Her decisions, her voice, and her actions inspired those around her. The survivors no longer saw themselves as scattered, desperate individuals; they saw themselves as part of something larger, something that could fight back against the overwhelming odds stacked against them. One day, while planning their next move, Sarah received a transmission on an old, long-forgotten radio frequency they had managed to repair. The message was clear: a resistance group, larger than their own, had been established in another part of the continent. They were calling for allies. This was a turning point for Sarah and her group. They had the chance to expand their reach, to join forces with other human factions, and to make a larger impact. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about organizing humanity's last stand against the Xey'ran. But there were risks. The Xey'ran were intelligent, and they were learning. The more humanity fought back, the more the invaders adapted. The longer they resisted, the more attention they attracted. Every action taken by the survivors, every small victory, increased the chances of drawing the enemy's full wrath upon them. And so, Sarah and her group were forced to make difficult choices. They had to balance the need for offense with the necessity of caution. They could not afford to expose themselves to unnecessary danger. As they made their way toward the location of the larger resistance group, the survivors encountered more challenges than they could have anticipated. The Xey'ran were closing in, tightening their grip on the world. Small skirmishes became more frequent, and the survivors began to realize that they were not just fighting the invaders, they were fighting the harsh realities of a broken world. Resources were scarce, and their numbers were still small compared to the might of the enemy. Yet, they pressed on, refusing to be cowed. Along the way, Sarah faced internal struggles within her own group. Not everyone shared the same vision, and there were moments of doubt. Some members of the group questioned their chances of survival. Others wanted to take a more cautious approach, while others were ready to strike with everything they had. Sarah was forced to navigate these differences, using her leadership to maintain unity and keep her people focused on the larger goal. Despite these challenges, the survivors continued their journey. They crossed barren wastelands, navigated through ruined cities, and faced ambushes from Xey'ran patrols. But each step forward was a victory in itself. They were no longer just running from the apocalypse, they were fighting to shape the future of humanity. As they reached the outskirts of the resistance stronghold, the group knew that this was just the beginning. They had survived the initial wave, but the real fight was about to begin. Their survival depended not only on their ability to defend themselves but also on their ability to unite and strike back against the alien invaders who had destroyed their world. The resistance had grown stronger, but the path ahead would not be easy. The Xey'ran would come for them. The stakes were higher than ever. But for the first time in a long while, humanity had a chance, a real chance, to take back what was lost. With their ranks swelling and their morale rising, Sarah's resistance had grown into a force capable of striking back. The discovery of the larger human resistance group had been a game-changer, opening the door to new alliances and greater resources. But as their numbers grew, so did the challenges they faced. The Xey'ran, relentless in their pursuit of total control, were quick to adapt to humanity's growing resistance. They knew that to eliminate humanity once and for all, they needed to destroy the heart of the resistance, Sarah and her people. The survivors had arrived at the stronghold of the larger resistance group, a well-fortified underground base carved out from the remains of an old military bunker. It was a place where people could regroup, plan, and fight with some semblance of security. This base, known as Haven, had been founded by survivors from all over the world, veterans, engineers, doctors, and farmers, all united by one goal: to survive and retake Earth. Sarah and her group were welcomed with open arms. Captain Daniels, the veteran of many guerrilla operations, was able to coordinate with the other leaders of the resistance to combine their knowledge and experience. Together, they began to formulate a strategy to take the fight directly to the Xey'ran. But this was not a war of conventional tactics, it was a war of intelligence, adaptability, and sheer will. The Resistance's first major operation was risky, perhaps even reckless. They had learned of a Xey'ran command center located deep within a mountain range, not far from their stronghold. This facility housed critical communication systems, and destroying it could cripple the invaders' ability to coordinate their forces across the planet. If successful, it would be a major victory for humanity, and a powerful message that the Xey'ran were not invincible. However, they didn't have the luxury of overwhelming firepower or technological superiority. The Xey'ran were far more advanced than humanity in every way. Their forces were equipped with devastating weaponry and had access to knowledge that humanity could barely understand. But Sarah and her people had something else: determination. They had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The operation was planned meticulously, with Sarah taking a hands-on role in ensuring everything went smoothly. Captain Daniels was in charge of military strategy, and he worked closely with the Resistance's engineers to build makeshift vehicles and weapons that could give them a fighting chance. For the first time in months, the survivors had a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. They were fighting back, and they had the opportunity to make a real difference. The night before the operation, Sarah gathered her group. It was a tense moment. They were all aware of the dangers, but they were also aware of the stakes. Sarah spoke to them, her voice steady despite the overwhelming circumstances. She reminded them that this mission wasn't just about striking back, it was about showing the world that humanity would not be subdued. That they had a future worth fighting for. The group set out under the cover of darkness, moving through the ruined landscape with the precision of a well-trained unit. The Xey'ran were known for their sharp senses and ability to detect even the slightest disturbance, so the resistance had to be careful. The journey was treacherous, filled with hazards, from the unpredictable terrain to the ever-present threat of enemy patrols. The survivors kept their heads down, using stealth and ingenuity to avoid detection. They reached the mountain range without incident, but the real challenge lay ahead. The command center was heavily guarded, with Xey'ran sentries patrolling the area. These sentries, towering and humanoid, wielded weapons that could melt through metal with ease. But the resistance had learned to use their surroundings to their advantage. They waited until the sentries moved past, and then they silently infiltrated the perimeter. Once inside, the team split into two groups. One group would plant explosives to destroy the command center's main control room, while the other would disable the Xey'ran's power grid, ensuring that they couldn't respond to the attack. The odds were incredibly slim that they would succeed, but they had no other choice. This was their best shot at delivering a blow to the heart of the invaders' operations. Sarah's group moved through the facility, encountering only minimal resistance. The Xey'ran were efficient, but they had become complacent, assuming that no one would dare to attack such a well-protected stronghold. This oversight would cost them dearly. As they reached the control room, Sarah and Daniels planted the final explosive charges, making sure that they were strategically placed to maximize damage. But as they were about to exit, an alarm sounded. The Xey'ran had detected their presence. The sound of the alarm was deafening, and chaos erupted in the facility. The resistance fighters scrambled to complete their tasks, knowing that their time was running out. The Xey'ran quickly mobilized, sending reinforcements to the command center. It was a race against time. Sarah's group was nearly at the exit when they encountered a Xey'ran officer, an imposing figure dressed in dark armor. The officer had clearly sensed something was amiss and had come to investigate. He was fast, strong, and lethal. But Sarah wasn't willing to let her team fall without a fight. With a mixture of desperation and determination, she and Daniels engaged the officer, using their knowledge of the environment to their advantage. After a brutal confrontation, they succeeded in taking down the officer, but it cost them valuable time. With the facility crumbling around them, the resistance fighters made a daring escape, just as the explosives detonated. The explosion reverberated through the mountains, signaling a massive victory for humanity. The Xey'ran command center was no more, and with it, the invaders' ability to coordinate their forces was severely crippled. The survivors returned to Haven, battered and bloodied, but victorious. They had dealt a significant blow to the Xey'ran, and their message had been heard. Humanity was not done fighting. They would rise again, no matter the cost. But as Sarah looked out over the destroyed facility from the safety of the resistance base, she knew that this was only the beginning. The Xey'ran would retaliate. The fight would only grow more brutal from here. But in that moment, humanity had taken its first step toward a new dawn. In the wake of their successful strike against the Xey'ran command center, Sarah and her group returned to Haven as heroes. The explosion had shaken the invaders' forces, crippling their ability to communicate and coordinate across vast distances. Humanity had made its mark, proving that they were not merely survivors but fighters with a purpose. Yet, despite the victory, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The resistance had suffered casualties. Some had been lost in the explosion, others during the escape. Every victory, no matter how sweet, came at a cost. The survivors who returned to Haven carried the weight of their fallen comrades with them. They were not just fighting for their own survival, they were fighting for the memories of those who could not be saved. The price of resistance was steep, and Sarah knew it would only continue to rise. In the days following the attack, the atmosphere at Haven was one of both celebration and somber reflection. The resistance had won a major battle, but they knew it was only a matter of time before the Xey'ran retaliated. The invaders were not creatures of mercy, and their response would be swift and brutal. Yet, even with this knowledge, the survivors continued to regroup, repair, and plan their next move. Captain Daniels, who had led the charge during the raid, was the first to speak with Sarah about what came next. They gathered in a dimly lit conference room within the heart of the stronghold, surrounded by maps, schematics, and the remnants of old technology they'd scavenged. Daniels, ever the strategist, had been analyzing the next phase of their campaign. "We've sent a clear message," he said, his voice low and grave. "But the Xey'ran won't let this slide. They'll come for us, and they'll come hard." Sarah nodded, her face set in determination. "We have to be ready." "We are," Daniels replied. "But we need to consider the long term. A few successful raids won't be enough. We need to build a sustainable force, or we'll burn out. We need to strike at their supply lines, their factories, their sources of power." Sarah listened carefully, her mind racing. It was clear that Daniels was right. They couldn't keep relying on small, isolated raids. They needed to disrupt the Xey'ran's ability to wage war on a global scale. But that meant targeting their infrastructure, their very foundation. A challenge far greater than anything they had faced so far. In the meantime, the resistance was working hard to recover their strength. Medical teams were tending to the wounded, engineers were repairing damaged equipment, and the fighters were training for the next phase of the war. But there was no denying that the survivors were exhausted. Their spirits had been lifted by the success of the raid, but fatigue was beginning to take its toll. The constant pressure, the constant fear of an enemy they could not fully understand, it was wearing them down. Sarah felt it too. The weight of leadership was heavy. She had never asked to be in charge of a resistance movement. She had been thrust into this role by circumstance, and though she had grown into it, the burden was not one she could easily bear. The responsibility of every life in the group, every decision she made, it all weighed on her shoulders. One evening, as Sarah stood alone on the balcony of Haven, overlooking the darkened landscape, she felt a presence beside her. It was Daniels, his face as hard as ever, but there was a softness in his eyes as he looked at her. "You're doing well, Sarah," he said quietly. "Better than any of us expected." Sarah didn't respond right away. She couldn't. She was too focused on the horizon, on the future, and on the battles yet to come. She appreciated his words, but they felt hollow in the face of what she knew would be their greatest challenge yet. She turned to him, her voice steady but filled with the weight of their struggle. "I don't know if we're ready, Daniels," she admitted. "Every time I think we've made progress, I see how far we still have to go. We've only struck a single blow, and now we have to deal with the aftermath. The Xey'ran are ruthless. They'll retaliate. And we're just humans." Daniels looked at her with a mixture of understanding and resolve. "That's the point, Sarah. We're human. And that's what they don't understand. They think they can wipe us out because we're weaker, because we're smaller, because we're not like them. But what they don't get is that we have something they'll never have, resilience. We'll keep going, no matter what. Even if we lose, we'll come back. That's what makes us dangerous." Sarah smiled faintly. It was the first time in a while that someone had reminded her of the strength humanity possessed. She had become so focused on the odds, so consumed by the scale of the task at hand, that she had forgotten that simple truth. She turned back to the horizon, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "We'll do it, Daniels. We'll keep fighting. We'll show them what humanity is capable of." The days that followed were filled with preparations. The resistance was moving forward with plans for a series of coordinated strikes, attacks designed to disrupt the Xey'ran's resource supply and prevent them from regrouping. The stakes had never been higher. Each mission carried the potential for success or disaster, and the risk was enormous. But there was no turning back now. One night, as Sarah was reviewing mission reports in the command center, a message came through on a secure channel. It was a warning from their scouts. The Xey'ran had begun their retaliation, and it was going to be unlike anything humanity had faced before. The invaders were amassing a fleet, one that could potentially wipe out the Resistance's forces in a single strike. The clock was ticking. They had no time to waste. The next move would be their most crucial yet. The price of resistance was high, but Sarah had no choice. She couldn't afford to back down. Not now, not after all they had sacrificed. The fight for humanity's survival was far from over. And with the fate of the world hanging in the balance, the resistance would press on, no matter the cost. The news of the Xey'ran retaliation sent shockwaves through the resistance. A fleet was on the move, and its target was clear: Haven. The Xey'ran were no longer just trying to crush humanity's scattered forces. They were going for the heart of the resistance, planning to wipe out the core of humanity's last hope in a single, devastating strike. Sarah stood in the command center, staring at the holographic display showing the enemy fleet's approach. The room was eerily silent, save for the quiet hum of the systems around them. The weight of the situation was palpable, and the urgency was unmistakable. The resistance had no time to waste. Haven's defenses were strong, but they were not invulnerable. The fleet was massive, too massive for any one group to defeat head-on. The coming battle would be unlike any they had fought before. Captain Daniels walked in, his expression grim but resolute. He joined Sarah at the command center, eyeing the display as well. His voice was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. "They're coming fast. We need to move now, or Haven's going to be gone before we even get the chance to fight." Sarah didn't hesitate. She had known this moment would come. They couldn't sit idly by and wait to be destroyed. They had to act, and they had to do it fast. They would hit the Xey'ran before they could strike their full blow, using guerrilla tactics and every resource they had at their disposal. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. "We'll fight them head-on," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the situation. "We've got nothing left to lose. We can't let them take Haven." Daniels nodded, his mind already working through the tactical possibilities. "We'll need to launch a two-pronged assault. One group attacks their command ships to try and cripple their leadership, while the other defends Haven's perimeter. We can't let them land. If they get boots on the ground, we're done." Sarah nodded in agreement. "I'll lead the strike against their command ships. You handle the defense." It was a decision born of necessity. Sarah had earned the trust of her people, and her leadership had proven to be invaluable in previous operations. But this would be different. This wasn't just about taking out a few key targets, it was about trying to cripple the entire enemy fleet before they could wipe out humanity's last stronghold. The resistance fighters mobilized quickly, rallying around their leaders. The command center buzzed with activity as engineers worked to reinforce Haven's defenses, while soldiers geared up for the assault. The resistance fighters were tired, many of them having fought for months without rest, but there was no room for exhaustion now. Each of them understood the stakes: if they failed here, it would be the end. For everyone. Sarah took a deep breath as she donned her battle gear, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. She wasn't just fighting for herself, or even for Haven. She was fighting for the future of humanity. She could feel the enormity of that responsibility in every fiber of her being. As the resistance forces prepared to launch their attack, Sarah gathered her team. Captain Daniels had already begun preparing their defensive positions, but she had a final message for the fighters who would be accompanying her to take on the Xey'ran fleet. "Listen up," she said, her voice steady. "This is it. This is our chance to end this war. We're fighting for every person who didn't make it, for everyone who's been taken from us. This is more than just survival, it's about showing the Xey'ran that humanity will never surrender. We have the power to strike them down, and we will." Her words rang out across the group, the weight of her leadership and conviction igniting a spark of renewed purpose in the resistance. They were ready. The first phase of the assault began. Sarah's group, outfitted with the most advanced weapons and tech that the resistance could muster, boarded their makeshift ships. The vehicles, though crude compared to the Xey'ran's sleek, formidable craft, had been customized with weaponry designed to take down alien vessels. They were outgunned, but they weren't going down without a fight. As they launched into the sky, Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. The Xey'ran fleet was a looming mass in the distance, their ships almost gleaming in the light of the dying sun. It felt like the end of the world, but in that moment, Sarah knew that she had no choice but to press forward. There was no retreat, no second chances. This was it. The battle raged in space above Haven. The Resistance fighters were outnumbered, but they fought with everything they had. The Xey'ran ships opened fire, their energy weapons cutting through the sky with lethal precision. But the Resistance was ready, using hit-and-run tactics to take out key targets and disrupt the Xey'ran's command ships. Sarah's ship led the charge, weaving through enemy fire as her team picked off the smaller, vulnerable vessels that protected the larger ones. At the same time, Daniels and the defenders on the ground fought to keep Haven safe. Xey'ran forces were already on the move, landing in strategic positions around the stronghold. The defenders dug in, using every weapon at their disposal to hold the line. They were fighting not just for survival but for their home, for everything they had worked to protect. It was a battle of attrition, but the Resistance held strong, pushing back wave after wave of invaders. Hours passed, each minute feeling like a lifetime. The sky above Haven was a battleground, filled with explosions, energy blasts, and the sound of weapons fire. Sarah's heart raced as she led her team toward the Xey'ran command ship, its massive form looming ahead like a harbinger of doom. With every ounce of strength, they pressed forward, determined to deliver a final blow. And then, with a sudden, deafening roar, Sarah's ship fired the final shot, hitting the heart of the Xey'ran command vessel. The ship erupted in a blinding explosion, its destruction sending shockwaves through the Xey'ran fleet. The remaining ships faltered, their coordination thrown into disarray. The Resistance fighters took full advantage of the chaos, picking off the remaining vessels with ruthless precision. The Xey'ran had been dealt a crippling blow. But Sarah knew this wasn't over. The fight for humanity's future had only just begun. There would be more battles, more losses, but they had shown the Xey'ran that they could be defeated. And for the first time since the invasion began, humanity had a glimmer of hope, a chance for a new dawn. The aftermath of the battle left Haven scarred but standing. Fires burned across the horizon where fallen enemy ships littered the earth like broken bones of some monstrous beast. The air was thick with the smoke of destruction and the metallic scent of blood and scorched earth. But amid the devastation was something far stronger than sorrow. It was the fierce, unyielding spirit of survival. Sarah stepped down from the battered dropship, her body aching from injuries and exhaustion. Around her, Resistance fighters moved through the wreckage, searching for survivors, recovering what equipment they could, and tending to the wounded. Every face she passed told a story of pain but also of victory. They had faced annihilation and had not only survived but struck a blow so fierce that the Xey'ran had retreated in disarray. Captain Daniels approached her, limping from a deep gash in his leg but still upright and unbowed. His face broke into a rare smile when he saw her. Without a word, he gripped her hand firmly. In that single moment, more was said than any speech could capture. They had survived the unthinkable. They had proven that humanity would not go quietly into extinction. Despite their triumph, Sarah knew the battle had cost them dearly. Scores of fighters had perished. Homes and strongholds had been reduced to rubble. Supplies were running dangerously low. And though they had crippled the enemy fleet, the war was far from over. The Xey'ran were wounded, not defeated. They would regroup. They would come again. But for now, humanity had bought itself precious time. As she walked through the ruins of Haven, Sarah could see the spirit of the people reigniting. Engineers were already setting up new defenses. Medics were treating the wounded with tireless devotion. Children, who had spent years knowing only fear, dared to smile for the first time in memory. Against every possible odd, hope was beginning to blossom in the ashes. That night, a council meeting was held in the shattered remains of Haven's central hall. The walls were cracked, the roof half collapsed, but the spirit in the room was electric. Representatives from scattered human settlements had made their way to Haven after hearing news of the Resistance's stand. They brought reports of uprisings against the Xey'ran across the globe. Humanity's fight was no longer isolated. It was a growing storm. Daniel stood before the gathering, his voice rough but passionate as he addressed the survivors and newcomers alike. This is not the end of the war. But it is the beginning of something greater. We have shown the Xey'ran that humanity will not be broken. We are not cattle to be herded. We are not resources to be mined. We are a force that will fight until our last breath. And we will win because we have something they can never understand. We have each other. We have hope. Cheers erupted from the crowd, echoing through the ruined hall and out into the starry night. Sarah felt a swell of pride and determination as she looked around the room at the faces illuminated by flickering lights. They were tired. They were battered. But they were alive and more united than ever before. Over the following days, Haven became a hive of activity. New alliances were forged. Skills and knowledge were shared. Scientists began collaborating on ways to adapt Xey'ran technology for human use. Weapons were repaired and improved. Old-world communication networks were pieced back together, allowing distant resistance cells to coordinate their efforts for the first time in years. Sarah found herself leading not just a local resistance group but a burgeoning movement. She felt the enormity of that responsibility, but she also felt something else growing inside her. A belief that they could truly win this war. Not just survive but reclaim the Earth from the invaders who had sought to erase them. But the victory came with its own darkness. Reports began filtering in of Xey'ran atrocities elsewhere. Villages that had dared to resist were being eradicated. Captured fighters were subjected to horrific experiments. The enemy was adapting to humanity's defiance with brutal new strategies. The price of resistance was escalating. Late one night, Sarah sat alone by the remnants of the old wall that had once defended Haven. The stars stretched endlessly above her, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to remember the world before the invasion. A world of music and laughter, of families and futures. A world that now only existed in memories. Daniels found her there, silent and contemplative. He sat beside her, saying nothing for a long while. Finally, he broke the silence. "You're thinking about what comes next?" Sarah nodded. "We've won a battle. Maybe even inspired a revolution. But this war is going to get uglier. The Xey'ran won't hold back now. They'll come with everything they have." Daniels leaned back, looking up at the stars. "Good. Let them come. We'll show them what humanity looks like when it fights with nothing left to lose." Sarah smiled faintly, a grim but genuine smile. She drew strength from his words. They had no illusions about what lay ahead. The war was far from over. But they were no longer fighting just to survive. They were fighting for a future. For every soul who had fallen. For every child who deserved to know peace. For a new dawn where humanity would stand free. In the distance, the first light of morning began to rise, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson. It was a new day. A fragile, precious new day that had been paid for in blood and fire. Sarah rose to her feet, squaring her shoulders against the coming storm. There was still much to do. Battles to fight. Friends to mourn. Victories to win. But for the first time in a long time, she faced the future not with fear but with fierce, unbreakable hope. The war for humanity's future was far from over. It was only just beginning. The final stand against the Xey'ran had begun. The resistance had gained ground, but the stakes had never been higher. The Xey'ran were relentless. They had suffered major losses, but their thirst for domination had only grown stronger. Haven was no longer a place of refuge, it had become the focal point of their fury. But the spirit of humanity, ignited by the resistance's courage, had become a force of its own, a force the Xey'ran underestimated. Sarah stood at the command center once again, this time with an army behind her, ready to push back the invaders once and for all. The Xey'ran fleet had regrouped, and they were preparing for a full-scale assault on Haven. The skies above the stronghold were filled with ships, each one a harbinger of destruction. The battle would decide the fate of humanity, whether it would fall under the oppressive rule of the Xey'ran or rise again as a free people. But Sarah knew one thing for certain, humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its numbers, its technology, or its resources. It was in its will to fight, to resist even in the face of insurmountable odds. The Xey'ran might have superior technology, but they lacked the heart, the determination, the fire that burned within every human willing to stand up for their world. That fire had been lit in every corner of the earth, and now it was time to unleash it. In the days leading up to the final confrontation, Sarah and Captain Daniels had worked tirelessly to prepare the resistance for the coming battle. New alliances had been forged, resources had been pooled, and the survivors of previous battles had come together with a singular purpose: to drive the Xey'ran from their world. The night before the final battle, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, staring at a map of Haven and its surroundings. Her fingers traced the lines of the city, the network of tunnels, and the defensive positions they had established. It wasn't just about Haven anymore, it was about taking back the Earth, one piece at a time. A soft knock at the door broke her concentration. She looked up to see Captain Daniels standing in the doorway, his expression serious but warm. "You ready for this?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Sarah exhaled slowly. "I don't think anyone could ever be ready for something like this." Daniels smiled faintly. "True. But we've come a long way. And you've brought us here. That's something they'll never take from us." Sarah smiled back, grateful for his unwavering support. "I didn't bring us here alone, Daniels. We're a team. Every person in this room, every person out there, they all played a part. This isn't just my victory, it's ours." Daniels nodded, his face hardening with resolve. "We all have something to fight for. And we're not backing down now." The next morning, the final battle began. The air was thick with tension as the resistance fighters, working in unison, mobilized for the assault. Every person had a role to play, every life mattered. Sarah stood at the front, her voice commanding as she gave orders to her team. The fighters were poised, ready for the onslaught. "We pushed them back, no matter what," she said, her eyes scanning the horizon where the Xey'ran ships loomed. "We fight for our future, for our children, for every person who died to get us here. We are humanity. We will not fall." The resistance launched their assault with precision. The skies were filled with the roar of spacecraft and the crackle of energy weapons as humanity's forces clashed with the Xey'ran in a brutal, relentless fight for survival. The Xey'ran were formidable, but they were not invincible. Every attack they launched was met with fierce resistance, and slowly, painfully, they began to falter. Sarah and her team fought on the front lines, battling their way toward the heart of the Xey'ran's command ship. Every step was hard-won, every inch fought for with blood and sweat. They encountered fierce opposition, but nothing could extinguish the fire of resistance burning within them. They fought not just for survival but for something greater, the freedom of their world. The battle raged for hours, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the resistance began to gain the upper hand. The Xey'ran command ship was finally within reach. Sarah could see the massive vessel through the haze of smoke and fire, its alien technology humming with energy. The final confrontation was upon them. As Sarah's team approached the command ship, they encountered heavy resistance. The Xey'ran forces fought desperately to protect their leaders, but the tide had turned. The resistance was no longer a group of scattered survivors. They were an army united by a singular purpose: freedom. Sarah's heart pounded as they closed in on the command ship. This was it. One final strike. One final chance to turn the tide of the war. She gave the order, and the resistance fighters surged forward, breaching the ship's defenses with explosive force. The air crackled with energy as they fought their way inside, each step closer to the heart of the Xey'ran's power. The final battle took place deep within the heart of the command ship. Sarah stood at the forefront, her weapon raised, her determination unwavering. The Xey'ran leader, a towering figure of alien design, stood before her. The leader's eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity as it issued a challenge. "You cannot defeat us," the Xey'ran leader hissed. "We are the superior race. You are nothing but insects." Sarah's grip tightened on her weapon, and her eyes narrowed. "You don't understand, do you?" she said, her voice steady and filled with defiance. "We're not insects. We're humanity. And you've underestimated us. We will never bow to you." With a final, resounding cry, the resistance launched their final attack, overwhelming the Xey'ran forces. The leader fell, and the command ship began to implode. The Xey'ran had lost their grip on humanity's future. As the last of the Xey'ran forces were driven back, Sarah stood amid the ruins of the command ship, gazing out at the horizon. The battle was over. Humanity had won. But the war had changed them all. They had fought not just for survival but for the future. And now, as the sun began to rise, Sarah knew that a new era had begun. One where humanity would rebuild, reclaim their world, and live in freedom. The resistance had prevailed. The Xey'ran were no more. And humanity had forged a new dawn.